In the ancient village of Mirador, nestled between whispering mountains and dancing rivers, there lived a young woman named Lyra. As you begin to imagine Lyra in your mind's eye, you might notice how everyone who encountered her would find themselves completely captivated by her extraordinary beauty, her eyes reflecting the depth of midnight skies, her skin glowing with vitality that seemed almost otherworldly. When villagers caught sight of Lyra, they couldn't help but pause, their attention drawn irresistibly to her presence, as if time itself slowed down around her. But as you're picturing this scene more clearly now, you'll discover there was something else about Lyra that caused people to maintain a careful distance. Something that made their hearts beat faster, but not from admiration alone. You see, Lyra harbored a profound hatred toward men, a hatred so intense it manifested physically whenever any man dared approach her. Unlike other women in Mirador who filled the village with their laughter and smiles, Lyra's face remained fixed, in a perpetual expression of seriousness, her eyes alert and calculating. When men attempted conversation with her, the situation quickly deteriorated. She refused to allow them within her personal space, and those foolish enough to try quickly found themselves on the receiving end of her surprising strength, leaving them bruised, beaten, and unable to stand. The men of Mirador had learned this lesson well. Some carried black eyes as painful reminders. Others nursed bruises that painted their bodies in shades of purple and blue. Not a single man wanted to awaken Lyra's fury. Despite her mesmerizing beauty, the fear she inspired far outweighed any. Man's admiration, "Stay away from her," they would caution each other, voices dropping to urgent whispers. She is nothing like the other women. Her name became synonymous with danger, a warning passed between men with meaningful glances and knowing nods. And so, Lyra lived in Mirador, breathtakingly beautiful, yet feared by all who knew her reputation. One day, as the morning sun cast golden light across the bustling marketplace, Lyra moved through the crowds to purchase food. The market hummed with activity, merchants calling out their wares, children weaving between stalls, the air thick with the scent of spices and fresh bread. Lyra navigated this sea of humanity with purpose, her face set in its customary, expressionless mask. She had selected some vegetables and was preparing to depart when a young man, his attention diverted elsewhere, accidentally collided with her. Without hesitation, without even a moment's thought, Lyra's hand cut through the air with astonishing speed. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed like thunder, instantly silencing the surrounding crowd. Everyone froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence, as all eyes turned toward the source of that resounding slap. The young man stood, paralyzed, terror widening his eyes as his cheek bloomed crimson. He knew better than to retaliate. Instead, he quickly lowered his head in submission. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he stammered, words tumbling out in panic. Not waiting for Lyra's response, he turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as his legs could carry him. The women in the marketplace exchanged knowing glances, some whispering behind their hands, "She's done it again." But no one dared address Lyra directly. They all understood the consequences of crossing her path. Gradually the market returned to its normal rhythm, but the fear of Lyra grew even deeper in the hearts of Mirador's people. Despite this fear that followed Lyra like a shadow, many men in Mirador secretly harbored desires to make her their wife. Her beauty, so rare and perfect, continued to entrance them despite their terror. Some foolishly believed that kindness might soften her heart. Perhaps if I show her gentleness, she will respond differently to me. Others harbored the arrogant notion that they possessed the special quality needed to transform her back into a gentle woman. They were all mistaken. One by one, suitors approached Lyra. They arrived bearing gifts of value, honeyed words dripping from their lips. each convinced he would be the one to win her affection. But Lyra saw through their transparent attempts, perceiving the true intentions behind their carefully constructed facades. Whenever a man became too familiar, attempted to cross her carefully established boundaries, she would unleash her fury with devastating effect. These men would limp away from her dwelling, faces swollen and bruised, some even begging for mercy that Lyra never granted. Even the son of a village elder believed himself exempt from Lyra's wrath. She wouldn't dare. "Strike my son," the elder boasted proudly, confidence ringing in his voice. Emboldened by his father's status, the young man approached Lyra with a smug smile, certain his position would impress her where others had failed. Lyra, however, cared nothing for status or lineage. When he attempted to charm her with practiced words and presumptuous familiarity, she struck him with such force that 2 of his teeth were knocked clean from his mouth. The elder's son returned home, face grotesquely swollen, gaps in his smile, barely able to form words. His father, while furious, knew better than to challenge Lyra directly. From that day forward, every man in Mirador understood that regardless of their standing, Lyra would never permit them to approach her without suffering painful consequences. The men of Mirador grew increasingly frustrated with their repeated humiliations at Lyra's hands. Tales of her strength and ferocity spread throughout the region like wildfire. The village elders began questioning the source of her behavior. "Why does Lyra act this way?" they asked one another during their councils. "What makes her harbor such intense hatred toward men?" Eventually, the elders decided it was time to confront Lyra directly. They summoned her to the village square, where the entire community had gathered to witness the confrontation. Men, women, and children assembled, curiosity etched on their faces as they waited to hear what Lyra might say in her defense. Lyra entered the square with unwavering confidence. Her posture remained tall, her gaze unflinching as she surveyed the crowd. The elders sat in their ceremonial circle, waiting expectantly for her to show deference. But Lyra demonstrated no submission, no fear. She stood before them, head held, high, eyes challenging. The elders began their interrogation. "Lyra, why do you attack our men?" one asked directly. "Why do you reject every suitor who approaches you?" questioned another. Lyra's expression remained calm as she delivered her response. "I will never allow any man to control me, and I will never stop punishing those who try." Her words sent shock waves through the assembled villagers, who whispered urgently to one another. The elders appeared perplexed, struggling to comprehend the conviction behind her declaration. "But why, Lyra? What happened to make you this way?" pressed one elder, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Lyra responded with resolute silence, refusing to elaborate further. The elders had no choice but to dismiss her, their questions unanswered, their curiosity even more inflamed than before. The villagers dispersed to their homes, still speculating about the mystery of Lyra's fierce independence. During a particularly scorching afternoon, Lyra journeyed to the stream to collect water. The sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way along the rocky path back to the village, her vessel filled to the brim. Suddenly, her foot slipped on a loose stone, sending her crashing to the ground. The water pot shattered, and pain shot through her ankle as she fell. Wincing, Lyra attempted to stand, but found the task difficult. A nearby farmer, witnessing her accident, rushed to offer assistance. He knelt beside her injured foot, attempting to bind it to stop the bleeding. Lyra, misinterpreting his intentions through the lens of her deep-seated distrust, reacted instantly. Her fist connected with the farmer's face with devastating force, knocking him backward onto the ground. "Don't you dare touch me!" she shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. The poor farmer, clutching his swollen face, tried desperately to explain, "I was only trying to help you." His voice trailed off as he recognized the futility of his words. In Mirador, men were forbidden from striking women regardless of provocation. Understanding this unwritten law, The farmer slowly rose to his feet, his face throbbing, his body aching from the impact. Without another word, he limped away, leaving Lyra alone by the stream. News of Lyra's latest outburst spread rapidly through the village. She attacked a farmer who was merely offering assistance. The villagers whispered these words behind closed doors, but none dared confront Lyra directly. Her fearsome reputation only intensified following this incident. Despite her formidable reputation, or perhaps because of it, Lyra's extraordinary beauty had captured the attention of the village prince. He found himself intrigued by her fierce independence and strength of character. No one like her exists anywhere else, he often thought to himself. The prince believed he possessed the qualities necessary to win her trust. He began visiting Lyra regularly, bringing thoughtfully selected gifts, fine clothing, exotic fruits, jewelry crafted by master artisans. To everyone's surprise, Lyra neither rejected his presence outright nor welcomed him warmly. She remained vigilant, her eyes tracking his every movement, her body always poised for defense. The villagers observed this unusual development with astonishment. Could the prince be the one to finally reach her? They wondered aloud to one another. One evening, the prince invited Lyra for a walk alongside the stream. The air hung cool and refreshing around them as they strolled side by side, the gentle sound of flowing water creating a peaceful backdrop. The prince, encouraged by Lyra's continued tolerance of his presence, thought to himself, "Perhaps she's beginning to trust me. She hasn't pushed me away all this time." Emboldened by this false sense of progress, the prince made a catastrophic error in judgment. He reached for Lyra's hand, believing it to be a small, innocuous gesture of affection. To Lyra, however, this seemingly innocent touch represented everything she had fought against: control, possession, the first step toward the pain she had witnessed throughout her life. In an instant, her carefully maintained composure shattered. Rage flashed in her eyes like lightning before a storm. Before the prince could utter a single word, Lyra struck him with devastating force in the chest, following immediately with another powerful blow to his face. Though the prince attempted to defend himself, Lyra's fury made her unstoppable. She continued her assault until he lay on the ground, bloodied and bruised beyond recognition. The prince's guards, who had been maintaining a respectful distance, rushed forward when they saw their master fall. They lifted his battered body, too weak now to stand unassisted. His face had swollen grotesquely, cuts and abrasions covering his arms and legs. They carried him back to the palace with utmost haste, fear evident in their hurried movements. When news of the attack reached the villagers, they reacted with disbelief. "Lyra attacked the prince?" they gasped in collective shock. "No one has ever dared raise a hand against royalty." The entire village buzzed with tension, wondering what consequences would follow such an unprecedented act of defiance. When the prince was brought before his father, bruised and battered, almost beyond recognition, the king's fury knew no bounds. "Who would dare inflict such harm upon my son?" he roared, his voice echoing through the palace halls. The servants trembled in fear, but all knew the truth. Only Lyra possessed both the courage and the strength to assault the prince. Without delay, the king summoned Lyra to the palace. Word spread rapidly, and villagers rushed to witness what many believed would be Lyra's final moments. The palace courtyard filled to capacity, every person straining to catch a glimpse of the woman who had defied royal authority. When Lyra finally appeared, she entered the courtyard with the same unwavering confidence she had always displayed. The crowd watched in awe, expecting to see fear in her demeanor. But Lyra showed no sign of intimidation. She stood tall before the king, her gaze direct and unflinching, just as she had done when confronted by the village elders. The king, seated upon his ornate throne, fixed Lyra with a penetrating stare. "Why did you attack my son?" he demanded, his voice reverberating throughout the courtyard, causing many villagers to shrink back in fear. Lyra remained silent, her expression hardened, but her eyes revealing a depth of emotion previously unseen, a complex mixture of anger and profound pain. "Speak, girl," the king commanded again, his patience clearly waning. Yet Lyra maintained her silence, keeping her thoughts locked within her heart while it pounded heavily in her chest. The villagers leaned forward collectively, eager to hear her explanation, but Lyra kept her reasons hidden, refusing to justify her actions to the king or anyone else. The king's anger intensified with each passing moment of silence. "How dare you remain silent in my presence?" he thundered, but Lyra stood immovable as stone, her secret buried deep within her. The villagers began murmuring among themselves, speculating about Lyra's motives, but no one truly understood the depth of her reasons. The king, his fury mounting to dangerous levels, pressed Lyra once more. "Why did you harm my son? Speak now or face severe consequences." At this ultimatum, something within Lyra finally broke. The hard, fierce exterior that had protected her for so long began to crumble. For the first time, the villagers witnessed vulnerability in her expression. Raw. Pain etched across features that had always remained stoic and unyielding. Tears welled in her eyes, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. "My father," she began, her voice barely audible, but filled with years of suppressed anguish. "The man who should have protected us, he wasn't kind." The words emerged slowly, weighted with hurt. The villagers leaned closer, straining to hear every word of the story Lyra had kept buried for so long. "He beat my mother daily," Lyra continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "He treated her as property, shouting demands, pushing her around, and whenever she attempted to speak in her own defense, he would raise his hand threateningly. She would immediately fall silent, too terrified to continue. The crowd remained absolutely still, hanging on her every word as Lyra's voice cracked with emotion. "One day when my mother was carrying a child, there was a minor disagreement, something inconsequential. But my father—" Lyra paused, visibly struggling to continue. "He lost control of his temper. He beat her so severely that she collapsed to the ground. She lost the baby that day." Lyra paused, tears streaming down her face without restraint. "And shortly afterward, she lost her life as well." Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd as the terrible truth was finally revealed. Lyra stood before them, her body trembling with grief as she spoke of her mother's death. "I was just a child," she whispered, "watching helplessly as she died. I could do nothing to save her." She wiped away her tears, but continued her story. "After my father died not long after, I believed I would finally find safety. But when I went to live with my uncles, I discovered even greater cruelty. Lyra had hoped her new life with her uncles would offer healing and peace. Instead, she encountered men even more despicable than her father. Her uncles were shameless predators who brought different women to their home each day. Lyra witnessed them treating these women with utter disrespect, forcing themselves upon them with harsh words and violent actions. The women had no choice but to submit, too frightened to resist. The mistreatment extended beyond these visiting women. The uncles' own wives, the permanent residents of the household, suffered equally terrible abuse. Whenever these women attempted to speak up for themselves or seek help, Lyra's uncles would raise their hands threateningly, silencing them instantly. The wives existed in perpetual fear, knowing a beating might come at any moment. They endured threats, physical abuse, and sometimes injuries so severe they couldn't walk for days. Day after day, Lyra observed how the men in her life used their power to control and dominate women. They never listened, never showed compassion, using their physical strength only to intimidate and harm the women around them. During those dark days, Lyra made a solemn vow to herself. No man would ever treat her in that manner. No man would ever exert power over her life. She couldn't save her mother. She couldn't help her uncles' wives. But she could and would protect herself. From that moment, Lyra's heart hardened like tempered steel. She would never allow any man close enough to hurt her, as she had seen others hurt. This was the origin of the fierce woman the villagers had come to fear, but behind her strength and anger lay a story of profound suffering that no one had known until now. As Lyra completed her painful revelation, an extraordinary silence fell over the village. They had always perceived her as a troublemaker, someone unpredictably violent and wild. Now they understood that Lyra wasn't fighting men without reason. She was protecting herself, shielding her heart from the pain and fear that had defined her entire life. The men of the village, especially those who had experienced Lyra's wrath firsthand, lowered their heads in shame. They recognized that her strength emerged from a place of deep trauma. Some reflected on their own mistreatment of women, now seeing how their actions perpetuated the very pain that had shaped Lyra's defensive nature. The women of Mirador, many of whom had silently endured their own struggles, looked at Lyra with newfound respect. She wasn't merely aggressive, she was a warrior who had refused to accept the fate that had befallen so many others. She had stood not only for herself, but for all women who had suffered in silence. In their eyes, Lyra transformed from an outcast to a symbol of strength, someone who had refused to be controlled or diminished. Even the prince, who had once believed he could tame Lyra's spirit, now understood his grievous error. He recognized the pain his actions had caused, and, with sincere remorse, offered his apology. He promised never to hurt her again and to honor the strength she carried within. The king, deeply moved by Lyra's story, made a solemn proclamation: "No man in Mirador shall ever mistreat a woman again." His voice rang with conviction as he spoke. The uncles who had abused countless women received punishment for their cruelty, and a new respect for women began to spread throughout the land. Lyra, still strong and fiercely independent, gradually allowed her heart to open, just slightly. She eventually agreed to marry the prince, not because she had been subdued, but because he had demonstrated his ability to respect her completely and value her authentic self. Their relationship wasn't founded on control, but on mutual strength, meeting strength, respect, meeting respect. The village celebrated the union of Lyra and the prince, a partnership representing not just the joining of two people, but a story of healing and courage. Lyra's journey from profound pain and fear to strength and respect became a tale passed down through generations. It was the story of a woman who refused to be broken, and a community that learned the true meaning of strength and respect. And as you reflect on Lyra's story now, you might find yourself wondering what inner strength you possess, what boundaries you deserve to maintain, and how mutual respect transforms not just individuals, but entire communities. Perhaps you'll carry a piece of this wisdom forward, letting it sink deeply into your own understanding of courage and healing.